All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Did everyone get some food? You don't go to sleep on us now. That can happen. Okay, that blood sugar goes up and the eyes come down. We don't want that to go on. Okay? So welcome back. We want to welcome those that are joining us on live stream. And we're not going to take a whole lot of time here. We want to get right with the presentation here this afternoon. So help me, please, to welcome back Dr. Daniel Minus.
Thanks, Leonard. All right, round 3. Hard to believe it's flown by. So hopefully all of you are feeling like your mind is more beautiful after this weekend, right? Yeah, mental health is, you think about where we've come in the last 20 years, even around the conversation about mental health, and it is pretty dramatic. It used to be something that we were not wanting to talk about hardly at all. But I think in the last few years, especially with COVID and everything, people are realizing that it's something we have to talk about. Otherwise, we're really in for a bad situation. I mean, it's bad enough already, but as we're going to explore this afternoon, looking at the young people's mental health more specifically, it's very dismal. And so, again, we don't want to just focus on the negative, but we have to realize where we're at so that we can start taking some steps to improve things. And, one of those key factors that we talked about last night, that if you weren't here and you're interested in enhancing the mental health of young people and your own mental health for that matter, I would encourage you to go back to last night's presentation, because screens are a big part, learning to manage our screen time, our digital time. We're not going to focus as much on that this afternoon, but I just want to remind you of that, because that's really key. If we're allowing screens to run our lives, it's going to be very difficult to manage our mental health. Well, why don't we just have a brief word of prayer and dive right into it. Dear Father, I thank you for the opportunity to speak again on the beautiful principles of mental health that you've given us. Thank you for these wonderful people that are here in Placerville. We've just enjoyed the fellowship and getting to know some of the people here, and I pray that you'd bless each family, each individual, the ones that are here in person, and also the ones that are watching online, and also the ones that will watch in the future. Father, you know all of our needs, all the heartaches, the pain, the struggles of life, but you also know the potential for joy and for connection. And so, Lord, I ask that you would help us as we spend these next minutes together, that you'd bless our minds, help us to be refreshed by your Spirit. Sometimes it's hard in the afternoon, but I just ask that your Spirit would give us fresh energy just to recognize the truths that are important for us. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so who are these young people? Well, we call these young people Generation Z. Generation Z. You have Generation X. Now, do you have Generation Y? Has anyone ever heard of Generation Y? Nope. So who comes after the X generation? The millennials, right? Yeah, so somehow the millennials got instead of Generation Y, and then they skipped Y and they went straight to Z. So Generation Z, ages 10 to 25, 26, born 1997 or later. So there we see on your right, Generation Z, the millennials, and then Generation X, the baby boomers, and then the silent generation. So there are some unique characteristics. So it's important when we're dealing with mental health and we're talking about how to improve mental health of a certain group, we need to understand the characteristics of that group. Now, we're making some generalities here, but it's still helpful to understand some of these characteristics. So one of the interesting things is that Generation Z is actually the most racially and ethnically diverse generation. So Generation Z still the slight majority of white people, 52%. But look at that, 25% Hispanic, 14% black, 6% Asian, and then 5% other. And so the next generation, which, what comes after Generation Z, by the way? Heaven. We hope, right? There is actually another name already for the next generation. What comes after Z, the letter Z in the alphabet? It's Alpha. They just start over again. Kind of boring, I know. But Generation Alpha is going to be is the first generation where the majority is non-white, actually. Generation Z is on track to be the best educated generation yet. They're more likely to be enrolled in college and have a college-educated parent than millennials, Xers, a comparable age. And they are financially minded. Look at this. You wouldn't think, you look at some of these young people and you think, oh, they must be irresponsible just because they're young people, but they're actually pretty financially minded. And some people think that it was the Great Recession, and not the Great Depression, but the Great Recession, which happened there in the earlier 2000s, around 2007, 2008, when the stock market took a dive. So a lot of these kids struggled with some hardship financially around that time, and they think that maybe that's part of what influenced them. About 68% or 66% would rather have financial stability in a career rather than doing something that you enjoy. So it's interesting, the mentality. Our digital natives. The iPhone was released in 2007, and so pretty much their whole lives, technology has been ubiquitous. So for many of us, we can remember the first time we got on a computer, or we got introduced to technology, or, I remember back when I was in grade school, we just had those old Commodore 64s, and we had these little games like Lode Runner and stuff that were, just ancient. And that was, we would just kind of see it, but we weren't really inundated by it. The Generation Z, they have been introduced from the get-go, and it's been a ubiquitous part of their lives. Even those on the right tend to be more politically progressive. So you can see here that, and this is just a question that kind of shows that percent saying that overall in our country today, blacks are treated less fairly than whites. So you can see that Generation Z would lean more towards the political progressive answer compared to the other generations. And that's what a lot of what we see in general in our country is that we're having more and more of a shift towards political progressive or more to the left. And more likely to say same-sex marriage is good for society. So again, millennials and Generation Z are especially advocating for that compared to the Generation Xers, the Boomers, and the Silent Generation. And they want more of an activist government, So when we think about the direction that America is going, the future, and I talk to young people, they really are interested in having the government take more control of our everyday lives. And I think a large part of that is because they see so many problems that we're seeing in our society, and they're saying, we need to make a change here. People are just not acting right. Young people are recognizing this stuff. They're not stupid. And, I see some of you young people out there, you see this stuff, right? Things are not going so well in our society, and so they're saying something needs to change. And the government needs to do something, otherwise we're in for a very dismal future. Now, I will say we have to be really careful there. When Christ came to this earth, he was very clear on this point. Well, let me ask you this. Was there a lot of injustice going on in Christ's day? Were there all sorts of problems in society? there was tons of problems. And, obviously, they were under a totalitarian regime of Rome, and they were dealing with all sorts of different injustices, persecutions. There was all sorts of factions, riots, all sorts of civil unrest. But how did Christ attempt reform? Did he go through the political realm? How did he attempt reform? That's right. It was actually through the hearts of people. He knew that no external reform would bring about lasting change. What Christ did is he actually met and reached the hearts of people, one person at a time. He knew that that was the only way that would bring lasting change. And so we need to be really careful, because a lot of times what happens is people can reform or live up to certain laws or standards, but inside they're not changed. And in the long run, this can actually create more problems, because now you have a government with more control, but people are not doing things for the right reason intrinsically because they believe it's right. They're just conforming, and in the long run, it actually leads to even further corruption. Now, here's another interesting thing. How do Generation Zs prefer to be communicated with? This was a surprise to me. What do you think would be the number one? Well, you would think social media, right? Or texting. But look at that. 43% actually prefer what? Face-to-face communication. So they still crave, we're still human beings, even with all the technology and whatnot, right? We still crave human interaction. They have more mental health problems. Even before COVID-19, mental health challenges were the leading cause of disability and poor life outcomes in young people. So let's look at that. So this is before COVID. Up to 1 in 5 children ages 3 to 17 in the U.S. had a mental, emotional, developmental, or behavioral disorder. From 2009 to 2019, the share of high school students who reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness increased by 40% to more than 1 in 3 students. And what about suicidal thoughts and behaviors? Between 2007 and 2018, suicide rates among youth ages 10 through 24 in the U.S. increased by 57%. And again, this is even before COVID, and we're going to see that since COVID, things have gotten even worse. So Generation Z adults were the most likely generation to say that their mental health has worsened compared with before the pandemic. Also, millennials suffered especially as well. Globally, depressive and anxiety symptoms in youth doubled during the pandemic. So why do you think, because, I was a little surprised by this, frankly, because I thought, well, it's probably going to be the older people that are kind of like isolated, stuck in their homes, or maybe stuck in senior care centers, et cetera, that are going to suffer the most. Why do you think Generation Z were the generation that suffered the most as far as mental health problems? They were not at all the highest risk as far as the physical implications of COVID. So what do you think it was? Yeah, I think a lot of it had to do with that lack of connection, because, a lot of them got pulled out of school, right? And it was really hard for a lot of the students that I work with. They would tell me about their graduations, They were either online graduations, or some people had a drive-through graduation. Just kind of weird stuff, right? They felt very alienated from their classmates. And so I think that was a big part of it. I also think that, what are you thinking about when you're going through the end of high school and into college? What kind of things are you thinking about? Hang out in the summer? Yeah, that's not going to happen, right, during COVID. What else are you thinking about? You're thinking about your future, right? You're thinking about, where am I going with my life? What does the future hold? And if you think about how dismal the future looked, especially during COVID, you can start understanding why there would be this sense of hopelessness that would start developing, right? Because they're looking at the future and they're saying, wow, if this is where the world is going, what's the use? What's the use? So in the fall of 2021, the child and adolescent, the American Academy of Psychiatry in child and adolescent psychiatry declared a national emergency in child and adolescent mental health because of this issue. And then also, the U.S. Surgeon General issued an advisory on youth mental health crisis further exposed by COVID-19 pandemic. And here we see the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. He says, mental health challenges in children, adolescents, and young adults are real and widespread. Even before the pandemic, an alarming number of young people struggled with feelings of helplessness, depression, and thoughts of suicide, and rates have increased. The future well-being of our country depends on how we support and invest in the next generation. It would be a tragedy if we beat back one public health crisis only to allow another to grow in its place. And that's kind of what we're seeing now. So we have to look at, well, what's the reason for that and how can we mitigate the risk? So what are the risk factors? Well, the government, U.S. Public Health Services, have shown us that there are different risk factors. There's ones that are individual, like age, genetics, race, etc. There's family risk factors, relationships with parents and family. And then there's environmental, relationships with peers, teachers, mentors, faith community, academic pressure, school climate. And then there's societal ones, social and economic inequalities, discrimination, racism, migration, media and technology, popular culture, and government policies. So these all shape the mental health of young people. But which factors do we need to pay attention to most closely? And again, it's like, when you look at this, there's a whole ton of different risk factors, but what's important to try to distinguish is what are the most important ones, because we're not going to be able to address everything all at one time. Yeah, in some levels, all these need to be addressed, but what are the practical ones that we can address on a very real way in our world today? So the follow-up question to that is, what variables have changed to increase these mental health problems? And so this is really where, again, we're just going to touch on this real quick, but if you want more information and data on this, watch the lecture from last night. Because what we find is that many researchers, and we'll look at the second data point here, point to the growing use of digital media, increasing academic pressure, limited access to mental health care, health risk behaviors such as alcohol and drug use, and broader stressors such as the 2008 financial crisis, rising income inequality, racism, gun violence, and climate change. And so I mentioned Dr. Twenji. She's done a lot of research on generational studies. She's a professor of psychology at San Diego State University. She's authored more than 120 peer-reviewed publications and has been researching generational differences in America for over 25 years. And she wrote this book called iGen. And so she was trying to advocate for the millennials actually be called iGen, but she didn't quite get her way. But it's an interesting book, and again, she saw that right around 2011, 2012 is where she saw a huge abrupt shift in mental health. For example, here you see depressive symptoms among 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And you see that steep curve there at the end, 2011 to 2012, that is when we really saw mental health problems taking off. And then again, we see a similar trend here with 12 to 17-year-olds experiencing major depression in the last 12 months. And then suicide rate also climbing, especially in the 15 to 19-year-old population. So some of you remember from last night, what happened in that 2011 to 2012 time period? Yes, the smartphone. So the iPhone was released in 2007, but 2011 to 2012 was when more than 50% of Americans started owning their own smartphone. And so now, in 2019, just over half of children in the United States, 53%, own a smartphone by the age of 11. And 84% of teenagers now have their own smartphones. That was 4 years ago. I imagine that it's probably more like 90% of teenagers now, and probably in the 60s%, even by age 11. So obviously a huge shift. And this was an interesting study that even before the iPhone came out, that they were already seeing issues going this direction. So this was a large generational increase of mental health problems in American college students and high school students, and they found that 5 times as many now score above common cutoffs for mental health problems compared to students around that World War II era. And so the conclusion of this study is the results best fit a model citing cultural shifts toward extrinsic goals such as materialism and status, and away from intrinsic goals such as community, meaning in life, and affiliation. So the point being, it's not just the iPhone that's all bad, okay? So even before that, we were having problems. But those problems since World War II. I've actually done quite a bit of research on how mass media came onto the scene. And so the television also changed the landscape in America significantly. And so mass media, in turn, bred mass consumerism, and it really changed the way America thinks. It's changed our values in a lot of ways to where we're more, and I say we, as a culture, maybe not you as an individual, but we as a culture are more focused on what can I have to make me happy rather than really those relationships and the things that really make us happy. So what can be done? What can we done? So what does research show is the most important key to navigate adolescence successfully? So they've done a lot of research to find out what is the most important key factor to navigate adolescence and become a healthy adult. What do you think the number one factor is? Okay, family. There's actually another factor. Although we are going to talk about family because this helps with this factor, okay? So it's actually self-control. Very boring sort of thing to think about, right? Self-regulation is another term. So what they found is that if an adolescent can have some self-control, then they'll do pretty good. But there's a problem here, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So self-regulation has been shown to help young people do better in school, successful in work, more financial success, more satisfied in relationships, better physical and mental health. The good news is it can be learned. But the problem is, here's the problem, that puberty is like an accelerator. Okay, so what it does, if you look at this part of the brain right here, that little red dot, it's such a little thing, but it creates so many problems in our lives. This is called the nucleus accumbens. And the nucleus accumbens is very, very sensitive to dopamine. This is where you have that sense of euphoria and that high when you engage in something that's really exhilarating, okay? So this could be risk-taking behavior. This could be maybe like, going bungee jumping or skydiving or maybe driving really fast. Or it could be doing something else that's really unhealthy, like, some kind of addiction. But what happens when you engage in this sort of behavior is you get a bunch of dopamine feeding into that nucleus accumbens, and that's what gives you that rush, that feeling of euphoria, that high. So in adolescence, when you're going through puberty, that part of the brain actually gets really big, it hypertrophies, and it gets hypersensitive to those rewards. And this is why young people love to take risks, because it feels so good. On the other hand, the brakes of the brain, what are the brakes of the brain? What helps you have self-control? Which part neurologically? The frontal lobe. Yes, the frontal lobe. And so the frontal lobe is not developed yet. The frontal lobe actually continues to develop until between the age of 25 to 30. So it's kind of like this picture right here, right? So it's kind of like your brain has the foot on the accelerator, pedal to the metal, and there's no brakes. And your brain's like, wee, this feels so good, it's so fun. But obviously your parents are kind of freaking out. Right, hopefully the parents' frontal lobe is developed, right? And so part of the issue here too, and I can't remember if I think I do have this in here. Let me just see if I scroll forward. You know what? I don't know if I do, so I'll mention it right now. So part of the problem is that in the last several decades, the onset of puberty has gotten much earlier, and the maturation of the frontal lobe has still remained the same. In other words, back in the 1800s, people didn't start going through puberty until often 16, 17, 18 years old. Now, a lot of times, finding signs of kids starting to go through puberty at age 6, 7, 8 years old. And so you can see then this leaves this giant window where you're having of, kind of this pedal to the hypersensitivity and that sensitivity and factors that play a role, including highly processed will actually accelerate the onset of puberty. Some is that exposure to explicit material will also accelerate puberty. And then probably one of the biggest factors, if not the biggest, so two other things actually, is obesity. So we have an obesity epidemic in this country, and so that will accelerate puberty. And then also light. So overexposure to light, like screens and not getting enough sleep, it lowers melatonin levels. Melatonin actually suppresses the onset of puberty. So if you don't have enough melatonin, then you're going to go into puberty much earlier. So that's kind of an aside, but you can start seeing why we're having more and more problems from multiple directions. So what do we do? How do we help our young people get more self-control? Well, do we just do we have more seminars like we are weekend? It's nice if we could just educate them, tell them, you need to have self-control. That's what's going to help you in the long run. So most systematic research on health education indicates that even the best programs are successful at changing adolescents' knowledge. So adolescents are super smart. They're like sponges. They can learn stuff quick. But what? Not altering what? Behavior. Intellectually, adolescents can understand consequences, but in other words, they don't care. But they don't care. They're like, but I want to have fun. I'm willing to take the risk. So what is the most important contributor to self-regulation? Research actually shows it is a committed, stable relationship with a committed adult. And that would be family and also church family. So this is very key. And if you don't remember anything else that I talked about this afternoon, this is the key right here. Realizing it's not fair for us to expect our young people to self-regulate themselves. I'm all about freedom and autonomy and all that, but we have to give our young people limits, and we have to build relationships with them so that they will know that they're loved, but they will also know their limitations so they don't just run amok and get themselves into trouble and make mistakes that they can never undo in their life, that can scar them for the rest of their lives. So this lays a heavy responsibility upon us as adults, whether you have a young person in your immediate family or whether you're just a church member. Remember, I read that study from Harvard earlier this morning that was saying young people, that over 60% in the last several weeks, no one had made them even feel like they cared about them. No one, not one person. It doesn't take that long to help someone know, a young person particularly, that you care. And a lot of times, the problem I think is a lot of us adults think like that the young people don't want to be reached out to because they're not forthright. Maybe they're not coming to us. But I think a lot of the young people are actually, they don't maybe know how to engage with the adults. The onus is on us. We need to take that first step. That's, when you look at the ministry of Jesus, that's what he always did. He didn't wait. Yeah, a lot of people did come to him, but he often initiated, God impressed him to reach out to people. And I think God is calling us to do the same instead of just staying in our little worlds. So what are some things that family members and other involved adults can do? So the best role model you can be for young people is by taking care of your own mental and physical health. So we need to be an example. We want to show them that it is a joy to live by these good principles. We want to help children and youth develop strong, safe, and stable relationships with ourselves and other supportive adults. Encourage children and youth to build healthy social relationships with peers. So we want to encourage them to have peer relationships, but we need to monitor what kind of relationships those are. Curfews, I think, are still a good idea. Do your best to provide children and youth with a supportive, stable, and predictable home and neighborhood environment. I'm just thinking about this as I'm talking. I'm grateful, for example, that my wife's parents are a great example of that. They would encourage healthy relationships with other people, but generally, and Melissa, you can correct me if I'm saying anything wrong here, but they would generally always encourage the people to come over to their house so they could monitor. It wasn't like they were helicoptering all the time, but they knew what was going on. They were keeping an eye because they wanted them to have fun and enjoy, but do it in safe parameters, right? Try to minimize negative influences and behaviors. Ensure children and youth have regular checkups with the doctor. Look out for warning signs of distress. What's the number one symptom for an adolescent that has depression? Sleeping too much can be a common one, although there's a lot of adolescents that tend to do that even without depression. At least sleeping in, because they tend to stay up way too late. That's a whole nother health topic. But yeah, it's interesting. Just on that note, we have to have some level of compassion on our adolescents because there's something about the biological clock that does get a little messed up in adolescence, and adolescents do naturally tend to be night owls and have a really hard time getting up in the morning. And that's not just because they're lazy. It's literally the way that the brain and the body are working. And so fortunately for most people, that does turn around in the early 20s, okay? So, yeah, I need to be careful here. I'm going to get in trouble with some of the parents. So that doesn't mean that you can just sleep in forever. But again, we have to, I'm saying we have some compassion, but we don't enable, right? So the number one, or one of the most common things for depression symptoms is actually irritability. So a lot of times we think of sadness and just despondency and just overt depression, but irritability is often one of the most common signs for depression in young people. We need to be attentive to how our children and youth spend time online. This is huge. We need to really be careful with that and be a voice for mental health in our community. So again, what is the most important attribute to navigate the challenges of adolescence effectively? It is self-regulation. And what does the research show is the best way to foster that self-regulation? A stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult. And Ellen White says, I like this quote, she says, "Very much has been lost to the cause of God because of inattention to the young. There is a great reluctance on the part of many to become acquainted with the youth, but it is accounted of heaven a neglect of duty, a sin against souls for whom Christ died. The youth are objects of Satan's special attacks." Do you think the youth are being especially attacked nowadays? Oh, on every level. Stress. You know, the stress level just from school and the amount of work that they're expected to do, plus they're expected to do all this extracurricular stuff and like music and be involved in this, and then get ready for college and work and have a job too. And then all the media stuff and the social media. I mean, it makes my head spin just thinking about it. Some of your young people are nodding your heads, I see out. It's a lot. It's a lot. And so, yeah, you know, there is a lot of attacking going on. And the manifestation of kindness, courtesy, tender sympathy, and love will often work the salvation of those who are under the temptations of the evil one. The love of Jesus will win you an entrance into the hearts of the young. And when you have obtained what? The confidence of the youth. It takes, you know, young people have this really great sense. They are so good at detecting when someone's being phony, a phony detector, if you will. But if they notice that you're giving a genuine interest and you really care, they will let down their guard. You know, they will open up because they need that and they want that, but oftentimes they're guarded because they don't really sense that people care. And once we win that confidence, they will listen to your words and take your counsel. You should bind them to your heart by the cords of love and then instruct them how to labor in the cause of God. Why should this labor for the youth in our borders not be thought the highest of missionary work? You know, sometimes we talk about going on mission trips to other countries and this and that, and that's good. But the highest of missionary work is often within our own families, often within our own churches. And I love how she's saying, train them to labor for God. Because young people are full of energy, they're full of creative ideas, and instead of all of us adults running around and doing all the work, we should put them to work. Not to, you know, child labor. I'm not talking about like taking advantage of them, right? But what I'm talking about is let's engage with them. Let's use all of our strengths together. You know, that will help keep them out of trouble if we can challenge them and include them in the work. And I love this text, and this is really, you know, what we have the opportunity to do is fulfill prophecy. See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents. So I want to touch on relationship styles before we close this session. There's three main relationship styles between adults and children. And we really want to cultivate the third one. So the autocratic is the first one. This is cold, firm, and controlling. Do it. Why? Because I said so. Now, that's just fine for a 2-year-old. And it should be that way for a 2-year-old. But there comes a time in the child's life, as they're maturing, that they should be starting to engage more and more in the thought process of understanding why I'm supposed to be doing this. And they should be starting to really develop an intrinsic morality. In other words, I value these things too. And I'm choosing to do what's right because it's the right thing, not just because I'm controlled from the outside. This sort of parenting or relationship with children, what does this breed? What? Narcissist? What? Well, maybe, but what else could it breed? Rebellion. Exactly. This will breed rebellion. And so if people, some of you maybe grew up in homes where there's over control. So after a while, you're just like, I don't want any of this. And you want to just throw out the baby with the bathwater. The second one is permissive. So this one, by the way, a lot of people that were raised in an autocratic household end up being permissive parents. And this is where we see the pendulum often swinging from one generation to the next, where I will never be like my parents, like they were harsh, they were mean, they were whatever. And so then we say, okay, I just want to love my kid and let them hopefully they'll do what's right. But again, remember, young people need guidance. And this is where the third is that perfect balance, which is authoritative. It's warm, it's firm, and it's supportive. And I want you to do this because, right? So there's limits, there's regulation going on, but there's also great warmth. And my wife always reminds me of this, because sometimes I'm like, no, this is just the way, I'm very German. Like, this is the way it needs to be, and we need to do this. And she's like, smile. Be warm. And it's so true. It's so important that we balance. And yes, we have those limits, but we also have the warmth along with that. So you cannot love your child too much. Be physically affectionate. And this is, again, something that I got a lot of from my mom. My dad's very German. He was so I really try to be intentional, to touch my children, to hug them, to kiss them, to show them. That means a lot, especially from dads. It really makes a huge difference. And I think even, because sometimes, when the child is growing up and I don't have children, our oldest is only 9, but, when they grow up into adolescence, then we're like, okay, I can't touch them anymore, can't hug them. It's either not manly or, it can be uncomfortable for a dad when the girl starts to develop. But I think especially they continue to need that affection even into adolescence. And they might be like, oh, don't touch me or kid. But deep down, there still is that need for affection. And some of you young people maybe are wanting to argue with me on that. But I know it's true, even if you are denying it. So we need to provide a safe haven and be involved in our child's life. Nothing will be as important as time. Be involved. The strongest and most consistent predictor of children's mental health, adjustment, happiness, and well-being is the degree to which their parents are involved in their lives. So we need to know what's going on in their lives. We need to, all those soccer mom trips and the driving to the music lessons and all that, it gets to be old. But at the same time, those times are precious and they're important because you have opportunity for conversation and for being together and doing life together. Do some special stuff. Go on hikes. Like we talked this morning, one of the biggest blessings we have in our church is that we have the Sabbath. That is this built-in weekly opportunity for us to connect and be involved. There's nothing more important to your child's psychological development than your deep and sustained involvement. It does take time and hard work. It often means rethinking and rearranging priorities, sacrificing what you want to do for what your child needs you to do. And we need both mom and dad. This is something I wrestle with because I run a very busy practice, very, motivated to get to work and do all. But I have to be constantly thinking, okay, I can't allow work to take over. I have to be intentional with spending time with the family. And then be firm. Make expectations clear. Explain your rules and decisions. Be consistent. Be fair. Avoid harsh punishment. So there needs to be consequences, but at the same time, they need to be fair and they need to be consistent. And they're not harsh. And be supportive. Set the stage for success, not failure. Praise your child's accomplishments, but focus on the effort, not the outcome. Don't be overly intrusive. Relinquish control gradually. Help your child think through decisions. Protect when you must, but permit when you can. So one thing here, sometimes we focus and it's kind of that fine balance, right? Where it is important for us to be supportive and tell them, hey, look, you did a good effort. But I think sometimes we get a little bit of an extreme in our country now, too, where everyone gets a trophy for everything, It's like, okay. So there is that balance, right? We want to be supportive and praise the effort, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we overlook when they've made mistakes or where they could have improved. Children and adolescents also need that feedback, but how we do it is important. It's so important so that they don't feel criticized. Then they just want to give up and be like, well, why should I even try, right? So that's the kind of support they need, is for us to be authentic, genuine with them, and say, yes, I know you can do it maybe even better next time. But the main thing is that you try your best, and if we see that they genuinely are trying their best, that's the most important. All right. So winning adolescent hearts. The language of Generation Z is love, shown by, prayer. We need to be praying for our young people. I think this is huge. God can do things for our young people and in our own lives and through us, through prayer that he otherwise could not do. We need to spend quality of time. We need to be warmth. We need to show appropriate vulnerability, not pretending like, oh, we got it all figured out and we're perfect. It's important for us, even as parents and even as adults that maybe aren't parents, if we've made a mistake, what should we do? Should we apologize? Yeah. See, a lot of parents think that, oh, that's going to give them power, or think that they can get away with more stuff if I apologize. No. Actually, when we apologize and we show humility to the young people, it helps them realize, like, wow, they're really humble, they're being open, they're taking responsibility. That's modeling for them. That's really important. Seeking to understand their dreams, difficulties, and felt needs, positive practical support, firm, fair limits, and then challenging rather than coddling. So I want to close by sharing a brief story from my adolescence that made a huge difference. So I mentioned earlier today that in my teen years, my family went through a breakup. My parents got a divorce, which was very devastating for all of us that were involved, obviously. And so my brother and I were kind of doing our own thing. I mean, we didn't find security in the home life anymore, so we found security, quasi-security, it wasn't real security, in our friendship circles. And they weren't the best friendship circles, and we got involved in some things that weren't very healthy or good for us. But what happened right around that time was there was an older gentleman in our church, and his name was Al Weber, and he was an interesting character. He wasn't like your typical, he didn't even come to church every single Sabbath. He was actually an FBI agent, and so he was kind of this undercover FBI agent. So he's a really interesting kind of character. He had some health issues, and that was often why he didn't come to church. But he took a real special interest in me, and he knew that our family was going through a hard time. And he had been involved in a mountain climbing club, and he knew I was interested in hiking and mountain climbing. And so he invited me to join this mountain climbing club, and I remember I was getting ready. So I joined the club, and then I was learning how, some of the basics of mountaineering, and then I was getting ready to climb Mount Hood, which is the tallest mountain there in Oregon. And so as I was preparing for that, I didn't have much of any gear. Well, Mr. Weber took me to REI. And he said, okay, you know what? Whatever you need, I got this credit card here, and we're going to get it for you. And we just went through the store, and he completely outfitted me in, boots. He said, hey, whatever you need, we're going to get it for you. And he's basically saying, I don't care about the cost. And I remember right at the end, before we went to pay for the merchandise, he sat me down and he said, Daniel, I want to ask you for one favor. And I said, yeah, sure. What is that? And he said, Daniel, I want you to always remember that salvation is not found in the church. It's not found by just doing, good works. It's not found here. That salvation alone, is found in Jesus Christ. He said, turn your back on the church or whatever, but never turn your back on Jesus. And that has stuck with me from that day. And yeah, I went through a lot of ups and downs after that. But that seed, was planted by someone that took a genuine interest and did what he could to influence me and made a huge difference in my life. And so I want to leave you with that story because I want to challenge each one of us. We all have young people in our lives, whether it's in our immediate family or someone in our church or someone at school or anywhere. And so we want to really work on building a warm, firm, consistent relationship with an adolescent, and that will be the biggest difference maker in their lives. And so the question is, do you know one? And so pray about it. Think about it. I know that God will lay someone on your heart, and maybe it's not this big immediate thing that you do, and it will look different for each one of us. Or maybe you are that adolescent. And if you are that adolescent, maybe part of what you could do is say, okay, I want to be open to healthy adult mentors because I know that this will help me. This will help me to learn and grow to become the person that I want to be and the person that God wants me to be. So thank you so much for letting me share, and I hope that this is encouraging. I know there was a lot of discouraging statistics that we looked at, but there's also a lot of hope. When I meet with young people and I interact with them, what a joy, when you see them start to get it. Their minds are still so plastic, so able to change. And, that when they catch that spark of what the possibilities of the future and what God has in mind for them, and they catch the vision of how these principles can impact their lives and the lives around them, there is no stopping these young people. And so let's empower them. Let's work together. Let's not be like, oh, they're a hopeless case, because they're not. God sees that, and he will use us to encourage them. And for you young people, yeah, never give up, God has a special purpose for every one of you. And even though things are getting dark in the world right now, it's when the night is darkest that the stars shine brightest. And you have the opportunity to shine like never before. Thank you.
One second. I just want to thank Dr. Binus very much for coming out this weekend. It's been fantastic. But I wanted to open it up just for a few minutes, maybe just 5 to 10 minutes, if there were any questions that anyone had that Dr. Binus could answer. I don't want to leave the opportunity unanswered, okay? Does anyone have a question like to ask? Okay.
It's not a question. It's asking the young people that are here to give us some feedback. What was valuable to you, or what are some of the questions that you may still have after hearing this presentation, if you're brave enough?
Anyone have a comment or a question? Yeah, okay.
I think something that I really like that you pointed out, that's my mom right here. She's been here for your other sessions.
Trying to get her to come.
I wanted to come, but I couldn't make it until today. But something that I really liked that you said was, even through young people that have experienced what it really means to love God and worship God and want to serve Him, I just want to tell everyone about it, and I've been able subtly to see that even if you just worship God on your own, you're being a witness to other young people. And I actually invited one of my friends here She's about a year older than me. And I was like, we should come to this seminar with me. And she was like, yeah, I'll go. And she didn't make it. But anyway, I just, little planting of seeds to in random situations, it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, this is one of the things I often think about too, is we often, if you just throw seeds out, in the ground, we often don't know which of those are going to sprout and when they're going to sprout and all of that, And so our job is just to not hang on to outcomes, but just to live our lives exactly like you are, to just try to, share what you're doing and who you are and who God is, and then God will increase that heart. He's the one that's going to help that seed to sprout. And so it's beautiful. I love what you're saying, because we don't, I think sometimes we talk about, we have to do this witnessing program and this witness. The biggest witness is living our lives in a way that shows who God really is, and it comes out naturally. Jesus didn't say we need to strive to let our light shine. He said, just let it shine, And so it's something that as we form that relationship in our own hearts with God, that personal experience, then naturally it's going to come out and people are going to be attracted to that. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Anyone else? All right.
Something that's weird. Something that's always helped me, I know, going through COVID and all that, and growing up in the church, is the learning of things about the Bible, the understanding of truth, the truth in it. All these questions you might have about, why do we keep the Sabbath? Why do we do this? Why do we do that? That you can tell people, and it strengthens your faith a lot. It makes you know why you believe something. And when I started to really dig into that, all that stuff, it's when I really had a true relationship with God, and all that stuff kind of just faded away. So,
yeah, it's beautiful. We have such a hope and such a reason for that hope that the world is literally dying for, And so, like you said, it is truly a privilege to be, involved in a church, and not just any church, but a church that understands, that yes, there are hard times that we're going through, and there will be even harder times ahead. But through all of that, there's hope, and God has a plan. And amen. The battle is already won. Yes. And our job is to hang on, to keep our eyes focused on Christ, and to share, that good news that he's coming. But you're absolutely right too. What's beautiful is that there's very good reasons for all of the elements of our faith. That God's not an unreasonable God. When we look at all the reasons, there's so much evidence. Yes, there's always room for doubt, but there's way more room for faith.
All right. Well, no, it's for the kids. No. For the young at heart.
I'm not 65 yet. I just think it's really important if we can be an example to the kids, we want to share something with people. I mean, you might be driving through Taco Bell.
Yes.
And have glow tracks on your dashboard. And so I've given out, a gazillion books and glow tracks and everything. And now, she's just giving out tons of glow tracks all the time. And
That's
so, one of the ones that, because there's a lot of the glow track, the one with the fire on the front, people want to read that one. Okay. And then one of the ones that I think I get the best reaction from youth, and it might surprise you, but it's the one that says, it has the old man on the front, and he's kind of bending down, sitting, and he looks really sad and, hopeless, whatever. And is that a Signs of the Time one? Okay, well, anyway, it says, where is God when I'm hurting?
Yeah.
And so that is probably her favorite one to give out is Love
amazing.
Letter from Jesus. But I don't care if it's a Taco Bell kid or it's some kid in TJ Maxx or wherever. You give them that one, and you might think that's not for them. And you know what? They're hurting, or their mom's hurting.
Absolutely.
Or, their brother's hurting, or their uncle. They'll just read it, and they pass it on.
Absolutely.
So I think that being able to give kids, not just buy them a Starbucks or something like that, which I've done to a lot of her friends. I'll just see them, they're working at Safeway. And I'll just go get some snack for them and come give it to them. And they're just like,
They know
they're
you
poor.
care. Yeah.
And they want a snack. And it's just a little tiny things. And they know that you really care about them.
That's right.
But it's really great if we all have some glow tracks in our car.
Yes. And prayer, I can't overestimate or overstate the importance of prayer, because the Lord knows how he can use each one of us best to reach whoever, the young people and everyone else. But we need to pray so that God can impress us, what our part in the work is. And I think the glow tracks is a wonderful idea. But, there's a lot of other things that God might be calling us to do as well. So, all right.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's give him another good round of applause here. Thank you all for coming out this afternoon. Appreciate the comments here. Thank you so much for sharing. There are so many examples in Scripture of young people doing incredible things for God. The Scripture is filled with that because they got all the energy, okay? I used to have that energy. I don't know where it's at, but anyhow. Thank you so much for being here again. And for your friend that wasn't able to make it, we're live streamed. They'll be on YouTube so that you can watch them. And have a great afternoon. Thanks for being here.
Things that we